In the deserts of Arabia, what can a person think that the human being can be made of? That the living creatures can be made of? What are the options? What different options can you think of that a living creature can be made of? A person in the desert may think it is made of sand, maybe it's made of wood, maybe it's made of aluminium, of iron, of copper, of oil, of water, of hydrogen, of oxygen. You can make at least 10,000 guesses. And the last that anyone will guess in the deserts of Arabia is water. But the Quran says that every living thing is made of water. In Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30. It says in Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 45, that every animal is made of water. And in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 54, every human being is made of water. If you make a wild guess, the chances that you'll be right is 1 upon 10,000. The chances that if anyone makes 3 guesses and all 3 will be right, that the earth is spherical, that the light of the moon is reflected light, and every living thing is made of water, will be 1 upon 30 into 1 upon 2 into 1 upon 10,000. It is 1 upon 60,000. It works out to 0.0017%. I leave it up to you, the audience, to decide for yourself that if you apply this theory of probability to the Quran mentions hundreds of facts which were unknown at that time. If anyone made a guess, the chances that all the hundreds will be right, it will be somewhere very, very close to 0, and in the theory of probability, it will be 0. Some may pose the question that, Zakir, are you using scientific knowledge to prove the Quran? I would like to remind them that Quran is not a book of science, S-C-I-E-N-C-E. It is a book of signs, S-I-G-N-S. Quran has got 6,000 signs, ayats, more than 6,000, out of which more than 1,000 have scientific knowledge. I am not using science to prove the Quran right, because to prove anything right, you have to use a yardstick, something which is ultimate. For us Muslims, the ultimate is the Quran. Ultimate yardstick is the Quran. Quran is a Furqan. It is a criteria to judge right from wrong. But for that atheist, for an educated man who does not believe in God, for him, science is the ultimate. It is his yardstick. So I'm using his yardstick to prove whatever Quran has said. And we know very well that many a times science takes U-turns. Therefore, I have only spoken about scientific facts which have got evidence and proof. I have not talked about theories which are based on assumptions. I am using his yardstick to say that whatever your yardstick has said recently, 100 years back, it has already been mentioned in the Quran. And finally, we come to a common agreement that the Quran is more superior than science. So Quran is the ultimate yardstick, not science. Quran mentions about several scientific facts. Quran says in Surah Taha, chapter number 20, verse number 53, that the plants have been created in pairs, which we discovered recently. It says in Surah Ra'd, chapter number 13, verse number 3, that the fruits are created in pairs. In the field of geology, it's mentioned in Surah Anam, chapter number 6, verse number 38, that the animals and birds live in communities, which science has discovered recently. The Quran says in Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse number 68 and 69, it is the female bee which goes out and collects the honey. It is not the male bee, which science has discovered recently. These bees, they describe the pathway of the new garden they have found by the flapping of the wings. It's mentioned in the Quran, which we discovered recently. The Quran says in Surah Ankabut, chapter number 29, verse number 41, that the house of the spider is fragile. Besides describing the physical nature of the web of the spider, it is also describing about the relationship, the family relations, in which many a times the female spider kills the male spider. The Quran says in Surah Namal, chapter number 27, verse number 17 and 18, that ants are talking to one another. You may think it's a fairy tale book. What? Ants are talking to one another? Today science tells us the insect or the animal which has the closest resemblance to the lifestyle of the human being is the ant. It buries the dead. It has a very high system of communication. It has marketplaces, etc. Quran also speaks about medicine. It says in Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse number 60 and 69, that you get the honey from the belly of the bee, which we discovered today. And in the honey, there is a healing for mankind. Today, science tells us that in the honey, there are antiseptic properties. No wonder the Russian soldiers used it to cover their wound, which left very little scar tissue. It is used in the treatment of certain allergies. Quran speaks about physiology. It says in Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse number 66, and Surah Mu'minun, chapter number 23, verse number 21, it describes the blood circulation and the production of milk. And 600 years after the Quran speaks about blood circulation, Ibn Nafis discovered it. And 1,000 years after the revelation of the Quran, did William Harvey made it famous to the Western world. Quran speaks about embryology. The first verses of the Quran to be revealed were from Surah Alaq or Surah Iqra. It says, Iqra, Bismi Rabbika Allazi Khalaq, Khalaqal Insana min Alaq. Read, recite or proclaim in the name of thy Lord who created the human beings from something which clings, a leech-like substance. This and several other embryological data which is given in the Quran was taken to Professor Keith Moore, who happens to be one of the highest authority in the field of embryology. He lives in Toronto in Canada and was asked the question, whatever matter the Quran speaks about embryology, is it true? Some Arabs followed the guidance of the Quran. If you are in doubt, ask the person who knows. So they asked Professor Keith Moore, is it true? He said that majority of the matter in the Quran is 100% perfect, matching with the latest discovery of embryology. But there are certain statements in the Quran which I cannot comment on, because I myself do not know it. And one such verse was this, that we have created the human beings from something which clings, a leech-like substance. He said, I do not know whether an embryo looks like a leech. He went and got a photograph of a leech and examined in his laboratory under a very powerful microscope the early stages of an embryo, and it exactly matched with the photograph. And then he said, whatever the Quran mentions is perfectly right. And whatever new data he got from the Quran, he incorporated it into his book, The Developing Human, and took out a third edition for which he got the best medical book written by any person in that year. And he said that whatever the Quran mentions, all the things about embryology we discovered recently. It's one of the latest branch of medicine. It cannot be written by any human being. It has to be of divine origin.